Turning to microdata, so those were looking at GDP, and this is looking at microdata. So this is a paper with Anand here, and broadly, so this this is data from a nationally representative panel, annual panel of manufacturing plants, and we find that manufacturing output falls by about 2% per degree rise in temperature. We also used microdata from a number of case studies. So this is a picture from one of them. It's a garment manufacturing plant. Next slide. So that's the panel, the top two panels, A and B, garment plants. And what you see here, the data was collected at the daily frequency. So we got the data from the firm that owns these plants. And what you see here is that in plants in which there's no climate control, which is the red lines, you see this dip with maximum temperature in a productivity measure, which the company keeps. And if you look at the plants, which is the gray line in panel A and the gray line in panel D, you see that if there's climate control, you don't see that dip at high temperatures. And the panel C is a different industry. It's a cloth weaving, some 3 cloth weaving plants in Western India. And you see that kind of dip. So there is some degree of consistency between the aggregate data, GDP, which you can study at different scales. And with here, this is the manufacturing sector, I should say, formal manufacturing at the micro level, right? And this is at daily frequency. Next. So we can compare this. So this is from the same paper, and this is just to give you a sense of effect sizes at different scales and frequencies. On the left, that's the worker level data from some of those garment plants, the ones without climate control. The second bar is the annual nationally representative panel of plants. The third bar is manufacturing output at the district level. That's also from the same paper, our paper. And the last two are the two papers I mentioned earlier, Dell Jones and Olken, looking at manufacturing in the Dell Jones Olken case, and I think GDP in the BHN case. You can see, that these effect sizes are roughly consistent, even though they're at very different scales and frequencies. But those, when I looked at manufacturing, what we have to keep in mind is that most people in low and lower middle income countries are not working in those kinds of environments. They're working in much harsher environments, and they have much lower earnings typically, like the person in the picture in front. And it's really an overwhelming share of employment in low-income countries and also lower middle-income countries like India. Next. So this is another study, not yet published, in which my co-author Saulamini Das and I did daily surveys of informal sector workers living in 2 Delhi slums for 1 month in the summer a few years ago. And I'm just showing you the graph here, which gives you a sense of what the temperature variation was during the period of the study. So the upper one is maximum temperature, and down below the blue line is minimum temperature, and the dotted line is wet bulb temperature, which is a measure that incorporates humidity in a nonlinear way, so as to pick up effects of heat on people. Next. And so there's a large diversity of occupations. We had about 400 people in the survey, And there's a large diversity of occupations of people living in these slums, as you can see. Some of them are wage workers, like the construction workers. They will pay daily wages depending on whether you get work or not. And some of them, many of them are self-employed. Next. So here, if we look at effects of various temperature measures on earnings, you can see the thing that jumps out. So if you look at the red ones, that's total earnings. And on the, it's percentage points, basically, changes in income on the vertical axis. So if you look at the red ones, you can see that the effect for gross earnings. Okay, so let me just say a little bit about what these things are. So we ask people every day, how much, did you go to work? How long did you work? How much money did you make? And so on. So we ask them about total earnings, and we ask them also about work-related expenditure. So if you subtract work-related expenditure from total earnings, you get net earnings, right? And for the self-employed people, there is some work-related expenditure quite often. And so the net earnings is the measure that we actually look at. So that's the blue ones. If you look at net earnings, you can see there's really a shockingly large effect of an additional degree. It's almost 19 percentage points. The other thing that strikes one about this figure, by the way, you see that expenditures, which are the gray ones, don't seem to be affected by heat. The other thing that strikes one is that if you look at maximum temperature, then although there seems to be a negative effect, it's very small and not significant at 5% actually. So if we compare this with the manufacturing sector results, what you can see is that actually these results are large. And now, one thing I should say is that the figure I showed you in the manufacturing sector work, that was maximum temperature, but we also did it with wet bulb temperature. And if you look at the size of the effect with wet bulb temperature, it's much smaller than the effect here. Okay. Now, we should expect that because there are a few things going on here which make this special. Firstly, it's only 1 month in the summer, so it's the hottest time of the year, so you would expect the effects to be largest at that time. And secondly, these people are more vulnerable. They're working mostly outdoors and rather than in indoor environments. And secondly, they're also earning lower incomes, right? They're paid much less on average. So you would expect them to be more vulnerable at home as well, right? So that's basically, it's a combination of these two things. We're looking at them at the worst time of year, and they are also more vulnerable. So it's some combination of those, but it's still striking just how big this effect is. I certainly wasn't expecting anything like that. The other thing that's striking is the fact that there's a much smaller effect of maximum temperature than minimum temperature or wet bulb temperature. And as you'll see in the next few slides, that seems to be the case for other outcomes as well. So this is looking at whether we ask people, did you go to work? If you didn't go to work, why didn't you go to work? And so here we have 3 outcomes here. The red ones are whether somebody did not work, probability of not working, and the other 2 are conditional on not working. So there was quite a lot of people who didn't, there were a large number of people who didn't work on many days. So on average, 17% of the time, somebody did not go to work. And of those, more than half the time, and they didn't go to work, they said it was because of heat. And it doesn't seem to be the case if you look at the gray ones, that the reason expressed for not going to work, being that work not available, didn't seem to be affected by any of the temperature measures. But as you can see, there is an effect of temperature. It raises the probability that people don't go to work. And the reason that they don't go to work being due to heat is, as you would expect, affected by whether it's hot or not. Right. So obviously part of the reason for this earnings decline with temperature is because people are not going to work. So this is there's some evidence, it's not conclusive, but it's suggestive that a good deal of what's happening here, the reason people are not going to work isn't because of the demand side. It's not because they don't expect to find work. It's because it's too hot. So that's suggestive that it's on the supply side. Next. Okay. Here we also asked them about whether any member of the family was sick, whether they visited a doctor, whether they slept well, whether they went to work. And you can see that, hotter days, it's more likely, at least for 3 measures, minimum, mean, and wet bulb temperature, that somebody was more likely to be sick if those measures were higher. Visiting a doctor there doesn't seem to be much of an effect in any of these measures except maximum temperature. You can see that the minimum temperature and wet bulb temperature, if it's higher, then they're less likely to report that they slept well. And they're less likely to report, they're more likely to report that they did not go to work, which I had mentioned earlier. Next. And this is on number of hours slept. And again, you can see, as you might expect, that minimum temperature, wet bulb temperature, there's a big effect on people reporting how long they slept. And that's less associated with maximum temperature. And we also asked them about spending money on medical expenditure. And here you can see that it's positively associated. So it's probably expenditure on medicines, because it didn't seem to be more likely that they went and saw a doctor. Okay. And we also asked an open-ended question about other expenditures which were not work-related. And one of the things that was mentioned quite frequently, so we coded it, was that they bought ice, or they bought water, or ice and water. And that seems to be obviously to cope with the heat. And you can see that, as expected, that's increasing in these temperature measures, but again, not in maximum temperatures. That it seems as if these measures, minimum and wet bulb temperature, are better predictors of many of these things than maximum temperature. Next. So, this is a survey that was done at one end of the global temperature distribution, right? It's Delhi in the summer, at the hottest time of the year. So it's kind of extreme, but so you might think that, it's kind of way out there, not that many people affected. But in fact, there's a lot of people. There's a large number of people who are exposed to temperatures like this for at least 1 month a year. So it is at one extreme, but it's not as if it's negligible by any means. Well, before I go to that, let me just say one more thing, which is there's an implication here, something which we didn't expect when we did the study, which is the fact that we don't see anything much going on with maximum temperature, but we see quite a lot going on with minimum temperature, wet bulb temperature, has an implication if it holds up, if this is replicated and it holds up, it has an important implication for adaptation, right? Because if you think about how you protect people, you can think about protecting them during the day when they're at work, and that's what one tends to think of kind of naturally. You think, well, people are working outdoors during the day, it's hot during the day, they're exposed, and so we should find ways to protect them. But it seems as if it's important that people are protected at night. Because if the minimum temperature is high and people don't sleep well, then presumably there's fatigue, illness, and so on. And a lot of these effects appear to be operating through that channel. So this is kind of it's used sort of just an illustration of how it's useful to have micro level studies, because it gives you information about what might work better for adaptation